The pen slipped from my trembling fingers, falling onto the cold marble floor stained not with ink, but with my silent, burning tears. My own son had used his cruel words to shatter 40 years of my life's work, all for a piece of land. My name is Eleanor Vance. At 64 years old, I am a ghost haunting the very mansion I built. For 4 decades, I was a titan in the world of architecture, a visionary whose designs shaped city skylines. Now my home, once a sanctuary of light and innovation, has become a gilded prison, and my own son Marcus is my jailer. Marcus, a man in his late 30s with the chiseled jaw of a CEO and the empty eyes of a con artist, returned to this house 3 years ago after his high-tech startup collapsed. He arrived with nothing but a suitcase and a veneer of wounded innocence, pleading to stay, just until I get back on my feet. My motherly instinct, a weakness I now despise, told me to open my doors and my heart. I didn't know I was inviting a parasite to feed on my life. The bitter ache in my chest from last night's argument still lingered. It wasn't about a cold meal or a misplaced object. It was about the one thing I had left of my late husband's legacy: a pristine piece of coastal land, a designated natural preserve, a place of rare beauty and irreplaceable biodiversity. It was a constant reminder of my husband's ideals. Marcus saw only its value as a luxury resort. He wanted me to sign over the rights to sell it to his new investors, a group he claimed would make him a billionaire again. I refused. That refusal, firm and resolute, was the match that lit his familiar rage. He didn't raise a hand to me, not physically, but his words were daggers. "You're a senile old woman, holding on to some romantic fantasy. That land is worth more than your entire career combined. You're a liability, mother, a weight holding me down." The venom in his voice was a physical assault. It left bruises on my spirit that no one could see. This morning, I woke at my usual 5 o'clock, a habit ingrained from years of managing colossal projects. Marcus was already at the breakfast table, engrossed in his phone, sipping his espresso. He never looked up. "Mother, breakfast. I have a crucial conference call with the Hong Kong investors today," he commanded, his tone as dismissive as if he were addressing a subordinate. I knew everything had to be perfect. The poached eggs had to be just runny enough, the artisanal sourdough perfectly toasted, the coffee at the exact right temperature. The smallest mistake could trigger his next outburst. The sharp click of high heels on the tile floor announced the arrival of Serena, Marcus's wife. She was a decade younger than him, a striking woman with a cold ambition that mirrored his own. Serena greeted me with the same saccharine smile she reserved for polite company. "Good morning, Eleanor. Are you working on your new sketches today?" I wanted to scream that I wasn't sketching. I was trying to find a foundation that could cover the deep-set exhaustion in my eyes, the exhaustion her husband had bestowed upon me. I wanted to tell her I couldn't endure another moment. But instead, I clenched my jaw and smiled a brittle smile. "Just a few ideas, thank you, Serena." Marcus looked up, his eyes a chilling shade of indifferent gray. He slid a small, expensive-looking tube across the table. "Mother, I bought this for you. It's a designer concealer, perfect for covering any minor blemishes from your little falls," he called the emotional and financial abuse, little falls. And he bought the concealer with my money, the allowance I had to beg, for from the trust fund he was supposed to manage. He had taken over everything, claiming that at my age, I was mentally too fragile to manage my own affairs. I hadn't seen a single bank statement in 2 years. Serena looked at her husband with adoration. "You're so thoughtful, darling. You always take such good care of your mother. If only she knew. If only she knew the perfect, successful man she thought she had was a monster who came home every night to emotionally dismantle his own mother." After breakfast, Marcus stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and whispered in my ear as Serena checked her makeup in the hall mirror. "Remember what we talked about last night? If you open your mouth, if you breathe a word of what happens in this house, you'll regret it. No one will believe you anyway. You're just a delusional old woman living off her son's generosity." As they left, holding hands like the perfect couple they pretended to be, I sank onto a kitchen chair. My tears were not from sadness, but from a profound, suffocating helplessness. I knew I had to do something, but I was utterly trapped. This house, which I had poured my life's work and savings into, was my cage. It all began 3 years ago, the moment Marcus's startup failed. He arrived with his bags, a lost look in his eyes, and a plea to stay just for a little while until I sort out my finances. I, in my naive, motherly love, opened the door and let him in. Of course, darling. This is your home too. I was a fool. I didn't know I was welcoming a viper into my nest. At first, it was subtle. It began with small criticisms. Mother, this garden is a mess. It's embarrassing when clients come over. Then it escalated to financial control. Mother, at your age, you shouldn't have to worry about managing your investments. Let me help. It's a risk you shouldn't be taking. I, the foolish mother, handed over my entire pension and investment portfolio. Within 6 months, Marcus had seized complete control. My monthly stipend was funneled directly into his account. He gave me $100 a week, as if I were a child receiving pocket money. When I asked about the rest of the money, he would say, Mother, I'm reinvesting it into high-yield real estate projects. It will double your retirement fund. Just trust me. Things became unbearable after Serena appeared. I was treated like a servant. Mother, please prepare a lavish dinner party. Serena's clients are very discerning. Mother, clear out the old art room. I need that space for my home office. I obeyed because I was terrified of being cast out of my own home. Because, while the house was legally mine, Marcus had convinced me to add his name to the deeds to ensure everything is taken care of when you're older. The physical violence began a year ago. A casual push, a sharp shove when I was too slow. Last night was the climax. When I resisted his demand to sign over the land, he became a monster. He screamed that I was useless, that I understood nothing about business, and threw me against the wall. Then, just as suddenly, he was calm again. He helped me up, apologized, and said in the gentlest voice, I'm sorry, Mother. I was just so disappointed to see you being so frail. Everything I do is for your own good. You have to learn to listen. I stayed in the kitchen all night, picking up the pieces of my dignity and the shattered fragments of my trust in him. It was then that I realized the person I loved most had become my tormentor. This morning, the phone rang. A strange number. Hello, is this Mrs. Vance? Yes, it is. This is Robert Thorne from the City Heritage Commission. We need to speak with you urgently about a significant discrepancy in the deeds for the coastal land. Can you meet us at our office at 3 p.m. today? My heart stopped. A discrepancy? What had he done to the land? My hand trembled as I hung up. A terrible premonition coiled in my stomach. But I had no time to think. Serena and her clients were due any minute. I went into the bathroom and took the concealer Marcus had given me, meticulously hiding the bruise on my arm. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Serena stood there with 3 other women, all dressed in designer clothes and exuding an air of quiet power. Eleanor, Serena said sweetly. This is Madeline. She's from the Metropolitan Museum. The moment I heard that name, I almost collapsed. Madeline was my sister, a museum lawyer I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years after a bitter professional disagreement. We looked at each other, both pretending not to know one another. She was smarter than me. She saw the fear in my eyes and the caked-on makeup. I ushered the women into the grand living room. The lunch had to be perfect, just as Marcus had demanded. High-end seafood, an expensive Sauvignon Blanc, and a delicate dessert. Despite Marcus giving me a pittance to run the household, I had managed to pull it off. I moved between the kitchen and the dining room, playing the perfect hostess. But Madeline's eyes never left me. She watched me with a familiar, probing look, the one she used when she knew I was hiding a secret. So, Mrs. Vance, what did you do before you retired? Madeline asked, a simple question that visibly annoyed Serena. I held my head high. I was a lead architect for 40 years. I retired 3 years ago. An architect? Madeline said, her face a mask of feigned interest. That's fascinating. I know some of your work. You designed some of the city's most iconic buildings. Serena quickly interjected with a forced laugh. Oh, she's retired now. Marcus handles everything. He's such a responsible son. Those words seemed to make Madeline pause. A woman who had managed multi-million-dollar projects and designed entire cityscapes didn't need her son to manage her finances. I knew my sister had realized something was deeply wrong. As I went into the kitchen to grab the dessert, Madeline followed me. Eleanor, she whispered, using my real name. Are you okay? You look different. Before I could answer, I heard Marcus's keys in the front door. He was home early. I'm fine, Madeline, I said hurriedly, pushing her out of the kitchen. Just tired. He walked in, his fake smile in place. He put a hand on my shoulder. I flinched almost imperceptibly. He felt my tension and his grip tightened, a silent warning. My mother is the best mother in the world, he said to Serena and her guests, his fingers digging into my collarbone. After the guests left, he closed the door and the mask dropped. You did well, Mother, he said coldly. You didn't embarrass me this time. Then he added a detail that made my blood run cold. Oh, and you should stop looking at those odd websites. The technician is coming to check your computer tomorrow. I didn't have a personal computer. I had been using his laptop foolishly in my desperate moments alone, to search for things like elder abuse, shelters for the elderly, and legal advice. He knew I was trying to escape. The phone rang. It was Robert Thorne. Mrs. Vance, can you still make it to our office at 3 p.m. today? It's very urgent. I glanced at the clock. 2:15 p.m. Marcus was upstairs, probably napping. This was my only chance. Yes, I whispered. I'll be there. I grabbed my purse, my ID, and slipped quietly out of the house. At the Heritage Commission's office, Mr. Thorne, a kind-faced, serious man, greeted me. Mrs. Vance, we discovered that your son, Marcus, forged your signature on the deed for the coastal land. He transferred it to a shell company of his to destroy the preserve and build a resort. I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. He hadn't just been abusing me. He had been defrauding me to seize my family's legacy. And there's more, Mr. Thorne continued. In our investigation, we found a series of suspicious transfers from his company to your bank account, and then the money was immediately withdrawn. Over $80,000 in just 18 months? Marcus was using me as an unwitting accomplice in his financial fraud. I was a victim of both domestic abuse and financial deception. I returned home at 6 p.m. Marcus was watching TV. When he saw me walk in, he looked at me with a sneer. Where have you been? The house is still a mess from lunch. For the first time in years, I looked him straight in the eye. I was at the Heritage Commission's office, son. His face went white. What did you say? I talked to them, Marcus. I know you forged my signature and defrauded me of over $80,000 using my account. He stood up, slowly walking towards me. Listen here, you old fool, he threatened. You have no idea what you're talking about. That money was mine, invested into your life. It was my money. I screamed, and my unexpected defiance made him step back. My pension, my art fund. He raised his hand to strike me, but the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Gable, our retired neighbor. Eleanor, is everything okay? I heard shouting. Marcus dropped his hand. His reputation was more important than his rage. Go see what she wants and don't say anything weird. I opened the door. Behind Mrs. Gable, I saw Madeline. Hi, Eleanor, Madeline said, her mask gone. You and I need to talk. I've scheduled a meeting with a lawyer for 9 p.m. I knew my sister had been following me. With a small nod, I stepped outside my home. That night, at Mrs. Gable's house, I told Madeline and a lawyer named Brenda everything. Mrs. Gable also came forward and whispered, I heard everything. I have a little camera on my balcony. I recorded all of Marcus's threats this morning. My heart pounded. Proof. For the first time, I had a weapon. The next morning, I went with Brenda to the police station. I signed a formal complaint of abuse and fraud. At 10:30 a.m., Brenda received a call. They arrested Marcus at your house. He's yelling and breaking things. It felt like a ton of bricks had been lifted off my chest. When I returned to my house, the sight was devastating. Furniture torn apart, Small sculptures shattered, family photos crumpled. But I knew this wasn't the end. When I checked my voicemail, there were 5 messages from Marcus. His voice was no longer that of an abuser, but a frightened child pleading, "Mother, please come get me out." It was all a misunderstanding. "I love you," Brenda explained. "This is manipulation. The classic abuser's tactic, violence, then playing the victim and gaslighting you." I stayed at Mrs. Gable's house. I knew Marcus wouldn't give up easily. A week later, I received the first letter from an unofficial lawyer. "Dear Mother," the letter read in Marcus's familiar handwriting, "Congratulations on your little victory. But this isn't over. I know your secrets. The secrets you've been hiding for 40 years from your career." The letter continued. "Do you remember the Opaline Artifact 20 years ago? The one you accepted into a show even though you knew its provenance was forged? I have proof, Mother. Proof that could send you to jail for art fraud and covering up a smuggling operation." My hands were shaking. 20 years ago, to save the Hawthorne Gallery from bankruptcy, I had looked the other way at a valuable piece of jade with a questionable origin, accepting the seller's flimsy explanation. "I thought it was a small risk. I have copies of everything," the letter concluded. "If you don't drop the charges, if you don't publicly apologize for faking your mental decline, those documents will find their way to the authorities." I had escaped physical abuse, but Marcus had found another way to control me. Blackmail with my own past. "This is blatant blackmail," Brenda said after reading the letter. "But we need to know the full extent of the evidence." I told Brenda every detail about the Opaline Artifact incident. I did it without criminal intent, but legally I had covered up a fraud. The fear and helplessness returned. I couldn't drop the charges, but I didn't want to face prison either. A week later, the second, more brutal letter arrived. It came with photocopies of my handwritten notes about covering up the artifact. "You don't learn, do you? Visit me in jail before Friday. Alone. And bring a letter withdrawing your complaint with a note that you've been experiencing cognitive decline." And more. "Did you think I didn't know you put up a camera? I have recordings too, Mother. Recordings of you accepting cash from collectors to bypass provenance protocols. Tax evasion and appraisal fraud. Marcus had planned everything. He had built a perfect trap. We have a third option," Brenda said, her eyes resolute. "We go ahead of him. We voluntarily confess all your past mistakes before he can use them for blackmail. That act will prove that Marcus is a master manipulator, trying to control his victim even from behind bars." It was a huge gamble, but it would take away Marcus's strongest weapon, my secrets. I looked at my empty house. I was tired of living in fear. "Let's do it," I said. "I'm tired of being controlled." The next morning, I wore my best suit. I was no longer afraid. At noon, Brenda called with a surprising piece of news. Mr. Julian Thorne. My sister's colleague wanted to meet with me. At Brenda's office, Mr. Thorne, a distinguished man, stood up to greet me. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so sorry," he said. "If I had supervised Marcus better, you may not have suffered so much." He revealed, "We've done a deeper investigation. Marcus's fraud wasn't just the $80,000. He siphoned off over $250,000 from the Heritage Preservation Fund over the past 2 years. Then, he made an unexpected offer. We've reviewed your 40-year work history. We need someone with your experience to help us rebuild our provenance process that Marcus destroyed. We're offering you a job with a salary of $5,500 a month, plus a $7,500 settlement for the damage we unknowingly caused you. Instead of prison and public humiliation, I was being given a second chance. And one more thing," Mr. Thorne smiled. "We re-examined the deeds to the coastal land." Marcus lied. "The land is yours, legally, and he cannot touch it." At 2 p.m., the press conference room was packed with reporters. I sat before the cameras. It was the last fear I had to face, the fear of freedom. "My name is Eleanor Vance," I began, looking straight into the lens. "Today, I stand here not as a victim, but as a person who chose the truth. My son Marcus is trying to blackmail me with my mistakes from 20 years ago. I made mistakes, I covered up the truth about the Opaline Artifact, and I accepted undeclared cash. Today, I am voluntarily confessing everything to take away his weapon, to free myself. That moment, as I confessed my mistakes, I felt a complete liberation. Marcus had nothing left to hold over me. I had unlocked my own cage. My confession sent shockwaves through the architecture world. Some called me a fraud, a disgrace. Others praised my courage. My sister Madeline stood by my side, a silent pillar of strength. She had arranged the press conference, ensuring that every word was broadcast to every major news outlet. She knew this was the only way. After the press conference, I felt an eerie sense of calm. The fear that had been my constant companion for years was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet exhaustion. I returned to my sister's apartment where I was staying. My phone, which had been off, now began to buzz incessantly. Messages from old colleagues, some supportive, some full of contempt. I ignored them all. A week later, the legal battle began. Marcus's legal team, funded by what remained of his ill-gotten gains, argued that I was a mentally unstable, elderly woman whose accusations were the result of my cognitive decline, a narrative Marcus had carefully crafted for years. My public confession, they claimed, was just another sign of my delusion. My lawyer, Brenda, was sharp and methodical. She presented the evidence. Mrs. Gable's recording of Marcus's threats, my bank records showing the fraudulent transfers, and the evidence of his forged signatures. The court case was a brutal, televised spectacle, a fight for my reputation and my freedom. Marcus, appearing via video link from jail, looked thin and pale, but his eyes still held that cold, manipulative glint. He stared at me throughout the proceedings, trying to break me with his gaze. But I was no longer the frightened woman I had been. I held my head high, my posture unwavering. One day he was given a chance to address the court. He turned to the camera, his voice dripping with faux sadness. "Mother, please," he said, his face contorted in a mask of pain. "Why are you doing this to me? Everything I did out of love. This is a cruel joke." The judge, however, was unimpressed. She had seen through his theatrics. His past behavior, his refusal to answer direct questions, and the mountain of evidence against him painted a different picture. After a long and grueling week, the court made its ruling. Marcus was found guilty on all counts of fraud, abuse, and blackmail. He was sentenced to a substantial prison term. He was also ordered to pay back all the money he had stolen from me. As the judge read out the sentence, I watched Marcus's face. The mask finally fell. His eyes filled with pure, unadulterated rage. He screamed at the camera, a stream of venomous curses until the guards physically removed him. I felt a sense of vindication, but no joy. The monster was locked away, but the scars he had left behind were deep. Later that day, I received a message from Thomas. He had been following the case and was now ready to meet. We met at a small, quiet cafe. He looked older, more burdened, but his eyes held the same kindness I remembered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft, "I have been digging into the architectural project you mentioned. The structural flaw. You were right to be concerned. It's worse than you thought. The firm that built the skyscraper, they've been covering it up for years." He pulled out a flash drive. "Marcus wasn't just blackmailing you. He was going to use this as leverage to take down the entire firm, and then expose you. He wanted to ruin you utterly." I looked at the flash drive. It was my worst nightmare, made tangible. My legacy, my life's work was a lie. I had spent my life building structures, only to find out that my most iconic one was built on a foundation of deception. "What are you going to do?" Thomas asked. I thought of Marcus locked away. He had used my secret to try and destroy me. I had been forced to confess my mistakes to regain my freedom. But what about the lives that were still at risk? What about the people living and working in that building? I looked at Thomas. "We're going to expose them," I said, my voice firm. "But we're not doing it for revenge. We're doing it for the truth." The real fight had just begun. I was no longer fighting for my life. I was fighting for my integrity, my legacy, and the lives of others. The road ahead was long and difficult, but for the first time in years I felt a sense of purpose. I was not a victim. I was a survivor, and I was going to make sure that no one else had to go through what I did. The story of my life had a new chapter, and it was time to write it. Armed with the flash drive and my new resolve, Thomas and I began our covert investigation. The flash drive contained a trove of internal memos, schematics, and emails that confirmed my worst fears. The skyscraper, a shimmering symbol of my career, was structurally unsound. A fatal flaw in the initial foundation design had been discovered during construction, but instead of halting the project, the firm had chosen to cover it up. They had used cheaper, inferior materials and faked the safety reports to keep the project on schedule and under budget. The firm was a Goliath, a multi-billion-dollar corporation with deep ties to city officials. Exposing them would be a career-ending, life-threatening act. But I couldn't live with the guilt. The thought of a building I designed collapsing, taking innocent lives with it, was a horror I could not bear. I met with Brenda, my lawyer, and Thomas, my new confidant. We laid out a plan. We would go to the media, but we would do it carefully. We needed to have our ducks in a row. A full public disclosure with undeniable proof. My sister, Madeline, used her connections at the Metropolitan Museum to get me in touch with a famous investigative journalist, a woman known for her fearless reporting on corporate corruption. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was a woman in her late 40s with a no-nonsense attitude and a fierce, uncompromising gaze. She listened to my story, her face unreadable. When I finished, she didn't say a word for a long time. Then she looked me in the eye. "This is not just a story of corporate fraud, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice quiet. "This is a story of a woman who chose to live a lie and is now choosing to live the truth. This is a story that will shake the very foundations of this city." Over the next few weeks, Evelyn, Thomas, and I worked together, meticulously going through the flash drive, cross-referencing documents and building a case. We found evidence of bribes paid to city inspectors, forged signatures of engineers, and a web of lies so intricate it was almost beautiful in its complexity. The pressure was immense. My life was now a living nightmare. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, afraid of who might be watching. My phone was a source of endless anxiety, with anonymous numbers calling and hanging up. I was a target. One day, as I was walking to the grocery store, a black car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down. A man in a dark suit with cold, empty eyes smiled at me. "Mrs. Vance, you should drop this. You don't want to get involved with people you don't know?" I didn't respond. I kept walking, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew who he was. He was from the firm. They were watching me. They were listening. They were everywhere, but I didn't back down. The fear was a familiar demon, but the courage was new and it was stronger. I had spent years of my life living in a gilded cage. I was not going to let them put me back in a mental one. The day of the big reveal came. Evelyn, Thomas, and I were to appear on a national news program to break the story. We were in the green room waiting for our cue. My hands were trembling, but my heart was calm. Evelyn gave me a look. "Are you ready, Eleanor?" I took a deep breath. "I've been ready for 20 years, I said. The host of the show, a charismatic woman with a serious demeanor, introduced us. "Tonight, we have a story that will change the way you look at this city's skyline forever." The segment began. Evelyn laid out the details of the cover-up, presenting the documents and emails we had meticulously gathered. The host looked on, her face a mixture of shock and horror. Then it was my turn. I looked straight into the camera, a camera that had once captured my moment of disgrace. 20 years ago, I said, my voice strong and clear. I was a young architect. I was ambitious. I wanted to build something great. And I made a terrible mistake. I covered up a structural flaw in a skyscraper to save my career. I did something I knew was wrong. I apologize to the people of this city, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to make it right. I had confessed to the world. I had laid my soul bare. The next few days were a blur of news reports, legal filings, and public outrage. The firm's stock plummeted. The city launched a full-scale investigation. The building was evacuated, its future uncertain. I was no longer a victim. I was an architect, and I was going to do what I had always done: build. The public fallout was swift and brutal. My name, once a symbol of architectural genius, was now associated with corporate deceit. I was a traitor, a liar. The media was a frenzy of speculation and outrage. I had lost everything: my reputation, my friends, my legacy. But I had also gained something invaluable: my freedom. My son Marcus had been the one to start this process. By trying to destroy me, he had given me the courage to stand up and fight. I was no longer a prisoner, either in my house or in my mind. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a far cry from my mansion. But for the first time in years, it felt like home. I could walk around freely, go to the grocery store, and breathe in the fresh air without a feeling of dread. I was a survivor. The city, after an extensive investigation, launched a task force to find a solution for the skyscraper. It was a ticking time bomb, a monument to greed and corruption. The question was what to do with it. A small group of protesters had gathered outside my apartment building, carrying signs with my name on them. They were angry, and rightfully so. I understood their rage. I had betrayed their trust. I had to make it right. One afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Mr. Thorne and my sister, Madeline. "The city has decided on a plan for the skyscraper," Mr. Thorne said, his voice hesitant. "They want to tear it down. But they're looking for a lead architect for a new revolutionary project. They want to turn the space into a public park and community center, a place for people to gather and heal." He looked me in the eye. "They want you to be the lead architect." I was stunned. After everything, they wanted me to build again? "Why?" Madeline stepped forward. "Eleanor, they believe in redemption. They believe in second chances. They believe you are the only one who can truly understand the significance of this project." I thought about it. It was a chance to atone for my mistakes, to rebuild my legacy, not on a foundation of lies, but on a foundation of truth. It was a chance to use my skills not for ambition, but for the community. I accepted the job. The project was the most challenging of my career. I was not only designing a park and community center, but I was also designing a symbol of a city's healing. I had to prove that I was a woman of integrity, not just an architect of buildings. The project became my life. I worked tirelessly, fueled by a purpose I hadn't felt in decades. I met with community leaders, listened to their ideas, and incorporated their vision into my design. The park was to be a place of reflection and remembrance, the community center a place of hope and healing. The day of the groundbreaking ceremony came. It was a beautiful sunny day. I stood on a podium, a shovel in my hand, ready to begin. The crowd was silent, watching me with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. I looked out at the faces in the crowd. There were young and old, people from all walks of life. I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, smiling at me. I saw Thomas, a look of pride on his face. And I saw my sister, Madeline, a tear in her eye. I wasn't a traitor. I was an architect, and I was building again. As I immersed myself in the new project, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years settled over me. The design was complex and deeply personal. I envisioned the park as a living tapestry of the city's history, with memorials for those affected by the skyscraper scandal and open spaces for communal healing. The community center was to be a beacon of hope, a place where art, education, and solidarity could thrive. The construction was underway, and I was on site every day, covered in dust and sweat, a stark contrast to my previous life of luxury and fine art. The media, which had once vilified me, was now fascinated by my story of redemption. I became a symbol of a second chance. But even as I rebuilt my life, the ghost of Marcus haunted me. His lawyers, now working on his appeal, continued to harass me. They filed motion after motion, trying to paint me as an unstable, untrustworthy narrator. The court, however, remained firm. The evidence against Marcus was irrefutable. One afternoon, I received a phone call from Brenda, my lawyer. "Eleanor, there's something you need to see. Marcus's legal team just filed a new motion. It's an attempt to discredit you by bringing up something from your past that even I don't know about." My heart sank. What else did he have? What other secrets had I buried that he had managed to unearth? I met with Brenda at her office. She handed me a document. It was a sworn affidavit from a man named Victor Thorne, a former assistant of mine from the Hawthorne Gallery. In the affidavit, he claimed that I had once secretly sold a priceless artifact from the museum's collection to a private buyer. The Black Sapphire Scepter, a legendary artifact from the Ming Dynasty. The affidavit claimed I had sold it to a European collector for a large sum of money and then faked its disappearance. It was a blatant lie. I had never done such a thing, but the affidavit was detailed and it had a ring of authenticity. It contained specific dates, names of people who were long dead, and even what seemed to be a copy of my signature on a forged bill of sale. Marcus must have found this man, or paid someone to create this document, I said, my voice trembling. He's a desperate man, Brenda said. He knows he can't win on the evidence. He's trying to poison the well, to make you look like a criminal who would do anything to save herself. He's trying to do to me what he did to my father, I said, and the words slipped out before I could stop them. I had never told Brenda about my father. My father, a respected art historian, had been framed for fraud by a jealous colleague. The scandal had destroyed his career and led to his early death. I had spent my life trying to prove his innocence, but I had never been able to. The pain of my father's injustice was something I had carried with me for decades. I looked at the affidavit. This was the ghost of my father's past, come back to haunt me. Marcus knew this. He had found a way to not just blackmail me, but to attack me in the one place I was most vulnerable, my love for my father. I needed to find a way to discredit this affidavit. But how? The man who wrote it was long gone, his reputation in tatters. The key to the truth was buried in the past. I thought about a time, years ago, when I was cleaning out my father's old office. I had come across a box of his old research notes, full of handwritten scribbles and cryptic diagrams. I'd put it away and forgotten about it. Could it be the key? I had to find it. I called my sister, Madeline, and told her everything. She was appalled, but her lawyer's mind was already at work. Eleanor, she said, her voice filled with a steely resolve, we will prove this is a fabrication, and we will use this to show the court just how far Marcus is willing to go. My search for the box began. I knew it was in my old mansion, now the property of Thomas, the brilliant architect who believed in me. I called him and asked for his help. He immediately agreed. He met me at the house the next day. The house that had once been my prison now felt like a place of hope. We went to my old study, a room I hadn't entered since Marcus had taken it over. The room was cold and empty, a ghost of its former self. We found the box in the attic, covered in dust. As I opened it, I felt a sense of connection to my father. His handwriting, his drawings, his passion for art history, it all came rushing back. We began to go through the notes. It was a tedious process, but we found what we were looking for. A detailed, handwritten log of every transaction, every acquisition, every loan and transfer of every artifact that had passed through my father's hands. And in that log, a note on the Black Sapphire Scepter. Acquired by a private collector, Mr. Albert Duponte, in 1999. Provenance verified. All paperwork filed. My father's note. My father's verification. But there was a more interesting detail. A small handwritten note on the margin. A small, intricate carving found on the scepter's hilt. A bird I have never seen before. A symbol of the collector's family crest. The drawing was of a small bird, a detail that was too specific to be a lie. We had our proof. A drawing of a bird that no one else knew about. A piece of evidence that could only have come from my father's meticulous research. The affidavit from Victor Thorne was a lie. The man who wrote it had never seen the scepter. He had no way of knowing about the bird. We had our weapon. It was time to use it. With the evidence from my father's notes, Thomas and I went to Brenda. She was astounded. "This is incredible, Eleanor," she said, her voice full of excitement. "This not only discredits the affidavit, but it proves that Julian is willing to fabricate evidence. It proves his desperation. We filed a motion to have the affidavit thrown out. In the courtroom, Marcus's lawyers looked smug, confident that they had me cornered. They had no idea what was coming. Brenda stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and authoritative, "we have evidence that the affidavit filed by the defense is a complete fabrication." She presented my father's notes, the meticulous log of the scepter's history, and the drawing of the small bird on the hilt. The defense lawyers looked at each other, their faces pale. They had no counter-argument. The drawing of the bird was undeniable proof that their affidavit was a lie. It was a detail only someone who had truly studied the scepter could have known. The judge, a woman with a keen eye for detail, looked at the drawing and then at the defense. "Mr. Thorne's lawyers, do you have anything to say?" They didn't. The motion was granted. The affidavit was thrown out. Marcus's legal team was in tatters, but I wasn't done. I had been a victim of a lie for decades. I was going to expose the truth. "Your Honor," I said, standing up. "I would like to speak." The judge looked at me. She knew I had a story to tell. "You may proceed, Mrs. Vance." I looked at the reporters, at the gallery, at the camera that was broadcasting my words to the world. I told them about my father, a brilliant art historian who had been framed for a crime he didn't commit. I told them about the pain I had carried for decades, the pain of his unjust disgrace. And I told them about how my son, in his desperation, had used the ghost of my father's past to try and destroy me. "My son, Julian, is not just a monster," I said, my voice filled with a powerful emotion. "He is a product of my past. The man who framed my father, a man named Henry Larson, was a man who believed that power and money were more important than truth. Julian is the ghost of that man come back to haunt me." The courtroom was silent. No one had ever heard this story before. I looked at Marcus's lawyers. They had no idea that by trying to frame me, they had helped me to finally set my father's record straight. The judge looked at me, a tear in her eye. She had heard a lot of stories in her career, but this was a story of a woman who had fought for her father's honor and her own freedom. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice full of admiration, "you are a woman of courage." The news of my testimony spread like wildfire. The story of my father, the brilliant art historian who had been framed, was finally being told. The media, which had once vilified me, was now praising me. I had become a symbol of a woman who had fought for truth and justice. But the story wasn't over. My son Marcus was still in prison, and he was still determined to get his revenge. I received a letter from him. It wasn't a lawyer's letter. It was his handwriting, full of rage and venom. "You have won this battle, Mother," it said. "But you have not won the war. I will get out, and when I do, I will make sure you lose everything you have ever loved. I will destroy your new park. I will destroy your new life. I will destroy your sister and your neighbor. You will have nothing." His words were a dagger to my heart. He was not just a criminal. He was a monster. I knew I had to act. I had to protect the people I loved, the people who had stood by me when everyone else had turned their backs. I went to the police. I filed a restraining order against him. I asked them to protect my family, and I waited. I was not a woman who lived in fear. I was a woman who lived in truth. The restraining order did little to soothe my anxiety. Marcus was in prison, but his words, his venom haunted me. I knew he was capable of anything. The love I once had for my son had been replaced by a cold, numbing fear. My sister Madeline and my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, were my constant support. They stayed with me, took care of me, and made me feel safe. I was grateful for their kindness, their love, their unwavering support. One day, as I was working on my design for the new park, I received a call from a lawyer I had never heard of. "Mrs. Vance, I'm calling on behalf of my client, Serena Vance. My blood ran cold." Serena, my son's wife. What did she want? "My client is filing for divorce from Marcus Vance," the lawyer said. "And she is seeking a large portion of your assets." "What?" I said, my voice full of disbelief. "On what grounds?" "My client has evidence that her husband, Marcus Vance, was emotionally and physically abusive to you," the lawyer said. "She is a witness to his crimes, and she wants a portion of your wealth as compensation for her emotional distress." I was stunned. This was a new level of manipulation. Serena, who had watched Marcus abuse me for years without saying a word, was now using my trauma to get her hands on my money. "She has proof?" I asked. "What kind of proof?" "My client has a series of recorded conversations, text messages, and emails between you and Marcus," the lawyer said. "She also has a series of photographs and videos of your home, showing the damage caused by Marcus." I couldn't believe it. Serena, the woman who had watched me suffer in silence, had been a secret spy. She had been collecting evidence of Marcus's abuse, not to help me, but to use it to get my money. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking. I had been so focused on Marcus, on his abuse and his betrayal, that I hadn't seen the real enemy, the woman who had been living under my roof, a spider weaving a web of deceit. I called my lawyer Brenda and told her everything. She was furious. "This is a new level of depravity," she said, her voice full of rage. "She's using your trauma for her own financial gain." The legal battle began. Serena's lawyers presented their evidence. It was a mountain of documents, recordings, and videos. They painted a picture of a woman who had suffered emotional distress at the hands of her husband, a man who had abused his own mother. The judge, however, was skeptical. "Ms. Vance," she said to Serena, "if you were a witness to this abuse, why did you not report it to the authorities?" "I was afraid," Serena said, her voice filled with a fake sadness. "I was afraid of my husband. I was afraid of his rage. I was afraid of what he would do to me if I spoke up." The judge was not convinced. "You had ample opportunity to leave," she said. "You had a job, a life, and your own money. You were not a prisoner. You were an accomplice." The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "do you have anything to say?" I looked at Serena. She was a beautiful, elegant woman. A woman who had been a spy in my own home. A woman who had used my pain for her own financial gain. A woman who was just as evil as her husband. "Your Honor," I said, my voice filled with a quiet strength, "I don't want her money. I want her to be held accountable for her actions. She was not a victim. She was an accomplice. She knew what was happening and she did nothing." The judge, a woman with a strong sense of justice, made her ruling. She dismissed Serena's case. She ruled that Serena was an accomplice to Marcus's crimes and had no right to my assets. Serena looked at me, her eyes filled with rage. She had lost. The spider's web of deceit she had so carefully woven had been destroyed. I had won another battle. But I had lost my faith in humanity. I had faced the monsters outside, but I had not expected to find a monster inside. The legal battles were over. Marcus was in prison, his appeal denied. Serena had been exposed as a calculating accomplice. I was a free woman. I had my reputation back, my money, and my life. But I was not at peace. I felt a sense of emptiness, a void that no amount of money or fame could fill. I had won the war, but I had lost a part of my soul. The trauma of the past, the years of abuse and manipulation, had left deep scars. I realized I had to heal. I had to face the demons within me, the demons that had led me to a life of ambition and ambition that had led me to a life of misery. I started therapy. I started to talk about my past, about my father, about my son, about the choices I had made. It was a long and difficult process, but I was determined to find a sense of peace. My sister Madeline and my neighbor Mrs. Gable were my constant support. They went to therapy with me, they listened to me, and they helped me to heal. I was a woman of 64. I had a lot of life to live. I was an architect. I was an artist. I was a friend. I was a sister. And I was a survivor. One afternoon, as I was working on my design for the new park, I received a phone call from the prison. It was Marcus. I didn't want to talk to him, but I knew I had to. It was the only way I could find peace. "Mother?" he said, his voice hesitant. "Yes, Julian," I said, my voice full of a quiet strength. "I want to apologize," he said. "I was wrong. I was a monster. I destroyed your life. I'm sorry, I was silent. I didn't know what to say." He had apologized before, but it had always been a lie. This time his voice was filled with a sincerity that was both heartbreaking and terrifying. I'm in therapy, he said. I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to atone for my sins. I hope you are, I said. I hope you find peace. I have one more thing to say, he said. I found the Opaline Artifact. It's real. My lawyers said it was a fake, but I know it's not. My friend, the one I used to blackmail you, he told me. It was a lie. The artifact is real. It's in a private collection in Europe. I can get you the name of the collector and you can get it back. My heart was pounding. The artifact? The one I had risked everything for. It was real. It was not a fraud. It was not a lie. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to have it back, he said. Because I want you to have your legacy back. Because I want you to be a good person again. I hung up the phone. I was stunned. Marcus, the man who had tried to destroy my life, was now trying to save it. I called my lawyer, Brenda, and told her everything. She was skeptical, but I knew he was telling the truth. I could feel it in my heart. I flew to Europe. I met with the collector. He was a kind, gentle man. He had bought the artifact from a disgraced art dealer who had told him a story about how it had been stolen. He was a collector of art, not a criminal. I told him the truth. He was heartbroken. He had been a victim of a lie. He offered to return the artifact to the museum. The museum was thrilled. The artifact, a symbol of my father's honesty, was finally home. I had my life back. I had my legacy back. And I had my son back. I was a woman who had faced her past, faced her demons, and had found a sense of peace. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a survivor. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a hero. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a survivor. The return of the Black Sapphire Scepter was a major news event. The media once again was in a frenzy. The museum held a press conference where they praised me for my courage and honesty. The director of the museum, a woman with a strong sense of justice, offered me a job as a senior curator, a role she said I had earned with my bravery. I accepted the job. My life had come full circle. I was back in the world of art, a world I had loved my entire life. But this time I was not there for ambition or fame. I was there for the truth. I started to give lectures, to talk about my experience. I talked about the dangers of ambition, the importance of integrity, and the power of honesty. I became a symbol of a woman who had faced her past and had found a sense of peace. The park I had designed was completed. It was a beautiful, peaceful place, a place for people to gather, to heal, and to remember. The community center was a beacon of hope, a place where art, education, and solidarity could thrive. One afternoon, as I was walking through the park, I saw a young couple sitting on a bench. They were holding hands and they were smiling. I felt a sense of peace. I had lost everything, but I had gained everything. I had lost my son, but I had found my humanity. I had lost my home, but I had found my home. I had lost my legacy, but I had found my legacy. My life was not a pile of rubble. It was a masterpiece, a work of art I had built with my own hands. The story of my life had a new chapter. And it was time to write it. I was a woman who had faced her past, faced her demons, and had found a sense of peace. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a survivor. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a hero. I was a woman who had been a victim, but was now a survivor. The courage to speak your truth is the ultimate act of liberation. It is the cornerstone upon which all true healing is built. Eleanor's story proves that no past mistake or present tyrant can hold your future captive if you choose radical honesty. Her journey from a victim in a gilded cage to a respected builder of community and trust shows that redemption is possible when we face our flaws. Don't let fear silence you. Silence is the abuser's greatest tool. If you are struggling or holding a secret that binds you, know that you are not alone. Find your voice, find your allies, and reclaim your life. Subscribe now to follow more stories of strength and share this message of hope with someone who needs to hear it. Your truth is your power.